Shana Tova, everyone. Now that I'm in year 2 here at the CJL, I'd like to take this opportunity to have you get to know me a little better. Specifically, I want to talk about what I was like when I was an undergraduate at Princeton a few years ago. So I graduated from Jericho High School in New York. And Jericho Public High School for many years was rated as one of the top public high schools in the country. It was uber competitive. In fact, they actually did the grade point average at Jericho High School. They calculated it out to the 1,000th decimal point. I was valedictorian, if that gives you any idea how incredibly academically competitive I was. And I brought that academic perfectionism here to Princeton. By the time I graduated from here, I graduated summa cum laude. Impressed? Don't be. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm proud of what I achieved academically here, very proud. And I know I'm smart, but then again, everybody who goes to Princeton is smart. But so for all my smarts that I had when I was here at Princeton, I would say I lacked something very critical. And what that was, I would say, are some critical aspects of wisdom that I didn't have at the time. You know, for all of my academic achievements, I actually was stressed out all the time. I was so focused on getting things perfect academically that I think I missed out on many opportunities to explore other areas that I could have been interested in and grown in other ways. Worst of all, I walked around this world with a core personal narrative, which was failure is not an option. To fail was a fate worse than death. Now, I have to acknowledge as well that living that way also had its benefits. People were very impressed with me, and my professors loved me. But for all of that success, I actually failed on a deeper level that I wasn't aware of. And that was, I was so focused on getting the perfect grades and winning all the awards and honors, and I actually missed the chance to grow as a human being. I was so focused on external measures of what I thought success looked like that I didn't take enough time to go inside to my own neshama, to my own soul. Now, I wonder when I tell this story, this doesn't strike some kind of a chord with some of our students who are here now. And not just our students, but some of the other community members who are listening to this sermon as well. I graduated Princeton 33 years ago. And now 33 years later, when I'm back, it's just as bad, if not worse, for the students who are here now. And I think I know the reason why. It's because we're dealing now with Gen Z students. And Gen Z is a generation that has grown up on screens and social media. They've come through a pandemic which has resulted in a whole generation that is more anxious, more isolated, and more depressed than my generation was. So in light of all of this pressure that our students are under today, I thought I would take this opportunity today to share some wisdom that I have gained over the years, hard-earned wisdom, not just about how we think about success, but more importantly, the value of failure, and specifically what failure really is all about. You know, one of my favorite biblical characters is the character of Joseph. Most of us are familiar with the story of Joseph and his coat of many colors, that he was the favorite of his father, despised by his brothers. He was eventually thrown into a pit and abandoned by his brothers. Can you imagine the horror he must have felt when he was thrown all the way down into that pit? He was eventually sold into slavery, and then he was framed and then thrown into jail, all the way down into the pit of jail once again for many, many years before he eventually interpreted Pharaoh's dreams and became Pharaoh's right-hand man and saved his people and all of Egypt from a famine. And we love to celebrate Joseph as the great success man. No matter how many times you throw him down into a pit, he rises to the top. What a great man of success he is. But for all of our celebrating Joseph for his success, we often gloss over perhaps his greatest character trait, which is as important and more important than some of his great successes, which is that he allowed his moments of deepest fall into those pits to shape who he would become, to shape his character. Remember, Joseph, when he was a young man, was an arrogant kid. He had these dreams where he was more important than everybody else, and he told his brothers about that. And then he was thrown into these low points in his life. And it was at those points that he questioned himself. He reevaluated himself. And he discovered his own capacity for humility. And ironically, by the time he became Pharaoh's right-hand man, he didn't think of himself as a man of power. He understood himself merely to be a servant of God. So ironically, it was his humility, learned at the lowest points in his life, that propelled him to the highest heights. So the first lesson we can learn about failure and what it is that failure is a gift. Now, you may have heard those kind of expressions before. Failure is a gift. And maybe it sounds something like a platitude. But what I'd like us to do this Rosh Hashanah is to actually think deeply about why it's a gift and what we mean by the fact that it's a gift. There is a professor of social psychology at Northwestern. Her name is Lauren Eiskreis Winkler. And she studies failure. I listened to an interview with her on NPR not long ago, and she talked about how she did a study where she gave subjects questions, and there was a right answer and a wrong answer. And for the subjects who got the right answer, they praised them and said, yes, you got the right answer, you're a success. And the people who got the wrong answer, they said, oh, you're a failure, you got the wrong answer. And then later they asked all of the subjects to recall what the correct answer. Now at this point, they all knew what the right answer was. But not surprisingly, the people who were praised for being a success remembered the right answer much more often than the people who were told that they were a failure. So what do we learn from this? Do we learn that failure feels awful and we can't learn from it and we should avoid failure like the plague? Well, not so fast. Not so fast. There is a teaching in the Hasidic tradition called Yerida Letzorech Aliyah, which means going down for the sake of rising up. And what it means is that there are moments in life where we go all the way down to the lowest depths, and it's only there. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav is a great Hasidic Rebbe, and he talked a lot about this. He said, when you go to the lowest depths, that's in fact where you find God speaking to you. And that gives you the ability to rise up to the highest levels of Torah. It's a beautiful idea. So what does it really mean? It means for us that there are times in most of our lives in our society where we think that failure is just something we have to quickly overcome, right? When we praise people who overcome, what are we praising them for? We're praising them for their resilience from failure. But what Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav and others in the Hasidic tradition want us to understand is that actually we don't take enough time to sit with failure when we experience it and to understand that God is speaking to us in those lowest points in our life. In other words, failure is a gift because it's when we have failed at something, that's when we can find critical data and information that we really need about ourselves. It's in our moments of lowest failure that we can often see our whole lives from a different perspective than what we'd been living from before. It's in moments of failure that we can course correct in our lives. In essence, we have to reframe what we mean by failure. Failure is actually God or the universe, or call it whatever you will. It's the moment when we're being shown where truly to go next in our lives. As it says in the book of Proverbs, Ki sheva yipol tzadikim u'rishaim yikashlu bera'ah, which means 7 times a righteous person can fall down and rise again. But a wicked person falls once and they are defeated. So, interestingly, one of the names of Joseph in the Jewish tradition is Yosef HaTzadik. He is Joseph the righteous one, the tzaddik. Because it is the tzaddikim, the righteous people, who understand the gift in failure, and they use their failures in life to find the strength to rise up stronger than before. So all of this insight that I'm giving, I'm sure you're thinking is much easier said than done. After all, failure feels awful, doesn't it? Failure is a horrific blow to our self-esteem. Lauren S. Christ Winkler, the social psychologist who does those studies, who I talked about before, has some insight for all of us who are perfectionists. She pointed out that most failures that we experience in life, and I'm talking most garden variety failures, are failures of some kind of thing. And by that I mean they're failures of academic achievement, or they're failures that we might have at work, or they might even be some failures in our relationships. But in all of these garden variety instances, these failures are failure to succeed in a project, or failure to achieve a goal, perhaps failure to master a skill, or even it's getting fired from a project, or even getting fired from our job. In all of these failures, they are actually failures of something. They are actually not a failure of you. We all hate failure because we see failure as an assault on our very preciousness as human beings. We think that failure is some kind of validation that we're worthless in life. And nothing can be further from the truth. Our Jewish tradition teaches us that every one of us are created b'tselem Elokim. We are created in the image of God. And actually, our task is to reframe failure as not something that happens to you. Failure is something that happens for you. That's really the whole message of Rosh Hashanah. It's the whole message of what we call tshuva, or returning to the best in ourselves. We are thinking of all of the mistakes and failures of our past year, and we are seeking insight from them and attempting to derive the strength to move forward better than we were before. This is why Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav and other great teachers from our tradition tell us that this is where we can actually find God the strongest. It's in our moments of mistakes and in failure. It's not something to run from. It's something to turn toward. Lauren S. Christ Winkler had another study that kind of follows up the first one I mentioned before. This time, it was the same right or wrong questions. People got them right, people got them wrong, but there was a third group. There was another group that simply watched others get the wrong answer and being told that they failed. And when they asked all of the participants to recall what they remembered, interestingly, the people who watched only the failures recalled the correct answer, as well as the people who were told that they succeeded. So what does that tell you? It tells you, of course, they recalled it because they weren't the ones who failed themselves. So there's a message in there. When you take your ego out of an experience of failure, you are actually, in fact, able to learn from it. And the problem is that most of us in this world, we do what we do, wittingly or unwittingly, because we're attempting to build up our ego and our self-esteem by doing it in the world. It's very human to do that. But actually, the spiritual path in life is the one that asks us a very important question, which is, take a look at the projects and involvements that you're doing. Would you work so hard for the success of those projects if your name wasn't associated with it in any way? Would you still care as hard to work so hard on it? If the answer is no, maybe it's time to ask yourself why you're getting involved in that project or that endeavor in your life. We have a name for this approach to life in Judaism. It's called lishma. Lishma means doing something for its own sake, literally for its name's sake. Right? We have something called Torah lishma. It's considered the highest form of studying Torah. The highest studying of Torah lishma, you're doing it not for any reward, not to be seen as the smartest person in the room. You're simply learning Torah for the joy of learning itself. And the goal in our Jewish tradition is to learn to live our lives lishma. Because when we do that, then we can see both of our successes and our failures as incredible gifts along the way. Successes are wonderful and celebrate them. Failures are a yirida letzorech aliyah. We are going down so that we can come up even stronger. It is this understanding of the value and power and divine voice in failure that, as I mentioned, distinguished Joseph to become a tzaddik, a righteous man. The same is true for Moses, by the way. He also understood that his failures were the source of his greatest strengths. Read the story of Moses, you'll see. Same thing for King David, by the way. He also learned from his failures and became better and more righteous and stronger. And it's not just our biblical figures who had this great wisdom in their lives. There are secular leaders as well. I'm told that Abraham Lincoln surrounded himself in his own cabinet with his own opponents, who very often undermined him and even backstabbed him. But he didn't mind because he was so focused on the project of keeping the Union together and saving this country from slavery and overcoming slavery that he surrounded himself with his adversaries in order to achieve the best result. That's living with greatest wisdom. Now, this is the insight I didn't quite have when I was an undergraduate here at Princeton. And it's something I'm so excited to share with our students and with others in the community now that I'm back all of these years later. It's a great honor. It's one of the reasons why I'm back here at the CJL, so I can share some of the wisdom I picked up along the way since I've been here with our students. And to our students and to others, if you're feeling anxious about failure in your life, like I did for many, many years, I want to offer you the following. Take a moment, take a deep breath, and ask yourself the very important question: why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I doing this to meet some kind of external measure of success? Am I doing this simply because I'm terrified of the blow to my self-esteem? If you're feeling that, it's okay, you're human, but take another deep breath and understand that this is an opportunity to reframe what you're doing with your life. By all means, we should all strive for excellence. We should try our hardest. We should aim for success in every way that we can. But when we fail, we should remember that it's not a failure of you, right? The way I look at life is that every single one of us is on our path to God. And part of that path to God involves, in fact, requires us to fail sometimes. And you know what? Rather than push the failure away, we need to embrace it, because those failures are going to lead us, trust me, to a success far greater than the superficial notion of success that we may have had in the first place. It's a real success that will give us the strength to grow and find wisdom as human beings. And that's why all of us here at the CJL, and this year, we're going to work really hard to really emphasize programs and experiences of health and wellness for the goal not just of celebrating Jewish life in all of its many, many wonderful forms here at the CJL, but also to give each and every one of our students an opportunity to find greater insight and personal wisdom as each of us go through not only the year, but through our lives. You know, I have difficult news for each and every one of us this Rosh Hashanah. At some point this year, we're all going to fail at something. And it's going to be difficult. For most of us, it's going to hurt a lot. But I urge us all, instead of just trying to claw our way out of those moments of failure, to listen to those failures. This Rosh Hashanah, let's listen to those failures, because we're actually listening for the voice of God guiding us in our lives. And may those experiences give us indeed the strength to become more loving, more compassionate, just, and wise people than we were before. Shana Tova.